Hello and welcome to Between the Lines, a podcast that brings you deep insights into the evolving reinsurance landscape across Asia Pacific. I'm Mithun Varkey, Editor-in-Chief. Join us as we unpack the week's biggest headlines and bring you a preview of the stories shaping the market ahead. In this episode, we're joined by one of the industry's leading voices, Hitesh Kotak, Chief Executive for Japan, India, Korea, and Southeast Asia at reinsurer Munich Re. Hitesh offers a front-row view of the 2026 renewals and what lies ahead as the market builds towards the critical 1/1/2027 renewals. He also unpacks the region's risk outlook amid El Nino and explores how reinsurers are navigating an increasingly complex landscape shaped by geopolitical tensions and rapid rise of AI. If you want to understand what's really shaping the market right now, this is a conversation you can't afford to miss.
Yeah, we had quite devastating fires in Korea last year. We had quite a few prolonged rainfall events in Thailand. Philippines obviously always exposed to typhoons, so is Japan, earthquake. So those are of course known events, but now the non-peak events are also creating, some kind of, economic losses. And we are still, I would say, a bit far away in terms of providing the right solutions and providing the right kind of preparation as an industry to cover these risks and to provide solutions to our customers.
Joining me in this episode is the InsuranceAsia News editorial team. With me is Deputy Editor Andrew Mullen, Senior Correspondent Aidan Gregory, reporter Joana Nguyen, and our intern Aleyna Wang. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Mithun. There's a lot to unpack this week.
Great, let's get started. I'd like to kick off the podcast with one of our biggest stories in the past 2 weeks, a Hong Kong High Court ruling in the Marsh lawsuit against Rohan Bapu and 3 other former Marsh executives who are now at Howden. A story that we first broke on July 1st. The court issued an interim injunction in the poaching lawsuit, barring the executives from soliciting Marsh clients dealing with accounts they handled before leaving or recruiting Marsh staff for 12 months post their departure. But notably, the judge stopped short of forcing the defendants to disclose any alleged misuse of confidential information, saying their sworn denials will stand for now. One of the interesting things about the case is that Marsh's allegations that Bapu, its former Hong Kong CEO, printed at least 110 sensitive documents before leaving the broker in 2024. The documents allegedly includes client lists and sensitive business data, and none of this was returned. It also alleges similar, though smaller scale actions by the other defendants. Also, one other defendant, Kelvin Law, is accused of approaching a Marsh client and submitting a tender after his departure, something that he admitted to the court. The defendants, however, deny any misuse of confidential information, deny poaching clients or staff, and reject any coordination in their move to Howden. This is only an interim injunction. The case is still a long way to go. We've been tracking this closely since early this year and will continue to follow it actively. Aidan, you also had an exclusive last week. Can you tell us a little bit more about the story?
I did. It was there's more movement in Hong Kong's financial lines market. We broke the news that Continuum, the startup brokers specialized in digital assets and emerging risks, has tapped Andy Tam to lead the build-out of its presence in Hong Kong. Tam was formerly Howden's cyber leader for the territory, and he's joined Continuum to build out its platform in Hong Kong after they recently acquired a license in Hong Kong, having entered into a strategic partnership with Free Capital Group. So this appointment is the start of their efforts to really build in Hong Kong going forward.
Quite interesting. I mean, we've seen a few newcomers in the Hong Kong market. The biggest story in the past week or so for the broader insurance market was the conclusion of the mid-year renewals, the July 1st renewals, which includes reinsurance programs across the world, in the US and Latin America, the Middle East, but most importantly for us in Australia and New Zealand. It's one of the key renewals of the year. Andrew, you've been following the renewals quite closely. Can you tell us what the key takeaways have been from the latest round of reinsurance renewals?
Yeah, so the overall sentiment pointed to a renewal season characterized by abundant capital, intense competition, and significant benefits for insurance buyers. According to Aon, record levels of reinsurance capital are providing insurers with greater flexibility. This is enabling tailored, creative solutions to support growth, manage volatility, and optimize capital. Howden Re reported that cedants secured rate cuts of between 10 to 15% on loss-free business, with some achieving even larger reductions. This was driven by assertive buyers, abundant capacity, and benign loss experience. Gallagher noted a clear shift towards softer conditions with risk and catastrophe pricing under sustained downward pressure due to intensifying competition. They also emphasized that pricing is converging towards technical adequacy, not overshooting it. Beyond just rate cuts, Howden Re highlighted that cedents also secured better terms and structural improvements to their reinsurance programs. Gallagher Re's Roshan Pereira confirmed that reinsurance appetite prevailed, with abundant capacity and robust balance sheets continuing to drive flexibility and softening across APAC programs.
Exactly. So we can see that the soft market continued to prevail during these mid-year renewals. I just want to add that this is also driven by the reduced reinsurance demand as a result of the recent insurer consolidation in Australia, as well as the cyclone reinsurance pool. At the same time, the return of a number of Asian and London-based reinsurers also added to the already plentiful capacity. And indeed, many cedents have been able to explore alternative options, for example, parametric solutions as well as sidecars as ways to, complement their traditional protection. While demand for parametric is driven by the increasing frequency of secondary perils, the ILS market has been booming, especially in the first half of the year, with a record number of issuance of cat bonds. How do we raise a question whether, the structural improvements at the moment will prove sufficient as the global risk environment continues to, evolve. However, brokers and insurers do note that reinsurers remained disciplined, but it also remains to be seen how much longer the carriers will hold the line before top-line targets start dictating the market.
Thanks, Andrew and Joanna. Indeed, I think there is, at least some brokers are saying there's still room for price reduction. So I don't think we had seen the end of the softening yet. We probably see more softening going into future renewals. Moving on from renewals, it's been a week of wild weather in China. We've seen a typhoon hit southern China. There's severe convective storms in central China, and the country is bracing for a super typhoon. Aleyna, you've been keeping on top of all the weather events from China. Can you tell us what's the latest?
Okay, this week China is grappling with a string of extreme weather events as typhoons and real tornadoes batter multiple regions and leave a growing trail of casualties and damage. Typhoon Mazak has unleashed torrential rains across South China, Guangxi, inundating towns and villages and triggering the widespread flooding. According to the latest data, there are at least 6 people have been killed and about 375,000 residents affected. Even as rescue efforts continue in Guangxi, the authorities monitor the approach of Super Typhoon Vavi over the Western Pacific. Current forecasts suggest it could affect a broad region of Eastern China and Taiwan later. Then we move to the central China's Hubei province. A real convective tornado outbreak struck on Monday night, bringing destructive winds and severe thunderstorms to cities. By Tuesday morning, the authorities report that about 14,600 people had been affected, with 11 people died and 1 people still missing.
Thanks, Aleyna. The visuals of the severe convective storm in central China is pretty terrifying. I think large parts of the city has been affected. Meanwhile, Super Typhoon Bavi, which in fact hit Guam and some of the other Pacific islands, caused massive damage there, is headed to eastern China later this week. It's still a super typhoon, so follow InsuranceAsiaNews.com for the latest updates on Super Typhoon Bavi. It's been a fairly busy week for regulators. We've seen some interesting regulatory action. Most notably, the Australian regulator APRA has announced its rejigged reinsurance framework for general insurers. Aidan, you've been following that situation, and can you tell us what these new regulations mean and what's its impact for Australian carriers?
Indeed. So after a consultation lasting several years, the APRA has finalised its amendments to Australia's general insurance reinsurance framework, and the new regime is now due to come into force in the new year on January 1st. These changes are designed to make it easier for Australian insurers to access alternative and cost-effective reinsurance arrangements, such as catastrophe bonds. And making reinsurance cheaper and easier is a priority for the Australian government. And it's an important way of addressing Australia's growing protection gap, with insurance becoming increasingly unaffordable for many households in Australia, particularly, as we see this increasing frequency of secondary perils and large losses from secondary perils is rendering insurance much more expensive for ordinary households in Australia. So in its review of the rules, the APRA has acknowledged that part of the old regime were limiting access to alternative reinsurance for Australian reinsurers. And in response to feedback from the market and their own study, they've now agreed to remove the requirement for a reinstatement to get full capital recognition for certain reinsurance arrangements, such as cat bonds, which typically don't include reinstatement provisions. And under the revised regime, appointed actuaries have been given far greater license to determine the capital treatment of reinsurance arrangements without having to go for the APRA for approval, although they will still have to get APRA approval in complex cases. And one of the examples that the APRA cited as complex cases would be parametric triggers. The industry has been awaiting these changes for quite some time, and there's hope that it will modernize the Australian reinsurance industry, make it more competitive internationally, and encourage innovation. These changes alone, of course, won't solve Australia's insurance affordability crisis overnight, but it does remove a major disincentive for Australian insurers to tap ILS markets to protect themselves against peak and secondary perils.
True. I think this was a much awaited reform, and there's been quite a lot of anticipation around what the APRA would do. I think when I'd spoken to Roshan Pereira, this Asia Pacific head of Gallagher Re, his view was that the general industry view is that all the recommendations are very positive for the reinsurance industry. And certainly Australia, despite being massively impacted by some of the biggest, all kinds of catastrophes, natural catastrophes, does not really have an ILS market, nor is it a big issuer of ILS and cat bonds, despite being probably the biggest investor into cat bonds from the region with its supers and other investment funds being active cat bond investors. So I think this would be a catalyst for the cat bond market in Australia. We're talking about other regulations. What very interesting development this week has been the announcement by the Monetary Authority of Singapore about a consultation on a proposed legislative framework for protected cell companies, or PCCs. The move follows an announcement last week from Singapore's Deputy Prime Minister and MAS Chairman, Gan Keng Leong. So the PCC is a new corporate structure which is aimed at strengthening Singapore's standing as a global insurance and risk management hub. So what exactly is a PCC? So it is a single legal entity with a central core and multiple cells. Each cell is ring-fenced from the others when it comes to assets and liabilities. That means you can run multiple risk programs under one PCC with strict legal separation between them, no cross-recourse, no leakage. Currently, if a risk owner in Singapore or some of the other jurisdictions want to set up a captive insurer or an ILS vehicle, they have to set up separate legal entities or special purpose vehicles for each program. So that's expensive, time-consuming, and duplicates operational costs and infrastructure costs. So PCCs are a solution to that. They're a cost-effective alternative. So MAS is now currently looking at targeting 3 insurance use cases. It is captive insurers, including what's called rent-a-captive models for smaller corporations, insurance-linked securities, and sovereign risk pools like Seadrift. So for captives, PCCs lower the barrier for small corporations to self-insure. For ILS, you can use a PCC to do multiple transactions instead of setting up a new special purpose reinsurance vehicle every time, cutting costs and speeding up time to market. And for regional risk pools like Seadrift, who do multiple reinsurance programs across multiple countries, they can have separate cells to onboard new countries and expand coverage without setting up new legal entities each time. And the MAS is targeting to launch this PCC regime starting from 2028. PCC regimes are very well established in markets like Bermuda, the UK, US, and Guernsey, and other jurisdictions. It's fairly new for Asia. Labuan is currently the only other Asian domicile offering cell captive solutions. So Singapore is playing catch up, but this could put Singapore firmly on the map as a go-to jurisdiction for captives and ILS issuers. Singapore is certainly the leader for captives in the region, but they have about 90 captives as of now. So it is a really interesting development for the market, and I'm sure there will be a lot of activity around this once this whole regime takes effect. Of course, there's also regulatory news around captives from Hong Kong. Just today, there was an announcement from the Hong Kong Insurance Authority. Joana, you fill us in.
Yeah, indeed. Competition among domiciles is intensifying. So today, Hong Kong announced that it has authorized 2 new captive insurers. The first new player on the block is HSH Captive. It's been set up by the Hong Kong and Shanghai hotels, the luxury lifestyle group behind the iconic Peninsula hotels, as well as the Big Tramp. They have partnered with global broker Willis to structure and manage this new entity. The second approval was for SF Captive, set up by global logistic provider SF Holding. In case you may not know, SF Holding operates SF Express, China's largest courier company. And the additions bring the total number of captive insurers domiciled in Hong Kong to 9, while most captives in the city have been established by, Chinese state-owned enterprises. HSH Captive and SF Captive bring the number of privately owned captive sponsors in the city to 3, alongside HSBC Group's Weifeng Asia.
Thanks, Joanna. I mean, certainly Hong Kong has a long way to go compared to Singapore, but it's certainly catching up. And especially encouraging is the fact that there are private enterprises like HSH and SF Group setting up captives in Hong Kong. The other big development in the last couple of weeks has been India's intentions to set up an MGA regime, especially in the GIFT City Special Economic Zone. Aidan, you spoke to the players in the market in India. What are they telling you?
So after GIFT City's regulator recently unveiled its regulatory framework for MGAs within India's Special Economic Zone, and I spoke to various senior market figures about the impact that this change will have on India's fast-growing insurance market. And the consensus is that there's real enthusiasm for MGAs in India, and the market thinks that this new regulatory regime can play a role in fostering growth and innovation locally within the country's specialty insurance market. Although the key test of the success of this new framework will be just how much capacity is put up by the global insurance industry to back locally based MGAs in GIFT City. But it's a long overdue reform, and there is genuine excitement about it.
Thank you, Aidan. We've been talking about insurance sector M&A, especially around Japanese insurers looking to invest abroad. We had an announcement come in late last night, early morning today, from Sompo. Andrew, can you tell us more about the Sompo's acquisition in the US?
Yeah, Sompo International has entered into a definitive agreement to acquire US workers' compensation specialist service insurance companies. This follows Sompo completing its acquisition of Aspen Insurance in February and continues Sompo's commitment to investing and growing its global P&C footprint.
The latest deal from Sompo, really highlights the themes that we discussed in our half-year M&A review and outlook for the remainder of the year. It hasn't been an outstanding year for global insurance M&A volumes, but equally, it wasn't terrible either, particularly given the immense geopolitical volatility that the industry has had to navigate, with the war in the Middle East dominating the headlines for most of the first half. In Asia-Pacific, volumes are actually up 37.3% from the same period in 2025. Globally, there was a bit of a slowdown, and volumes were down from both the first half of last year and the second half. But the first half did see this trio of landmark global insurance M&A deals, which boosted the volume somewhat. There was obviously Zurich's bid for Beazley, there was Tokyo Marine's tie-up with Berkshire Hathaway, and then there was the bid for Steadfast in Australia by Amwins Group and Dragonair Investment Group. This really highlights that the insurance sector has been very resilient throughout the war in the Middle East, and many of the secular growth drivers of insurance M&A, particularly in our region, have not gone away. Japan's insurers, as the Sompo deal last night shows, are flush with cash still, and they're still hungry for growth abroad, particularly in the United States. India continues to open up its insurance market to inbound investment. And more generally, we are in a global market softening, and a global market softening provides a very strong incentive for insurers to seek growth via acquisitions. So I think we're on for a good second half in terms of insurance industry M&A.
Thanks, Aidan. Yeah, indeed. I mean, you've mentioned India. We also saw QBE's acquisition of its joint venture partner in India, taking full control of its Indian business. Probably the first foreign insurer to take full control of its Indian JV. So hopefully that it'll be a busier second half. So, Ram, that's been a fantastic discussion. Now on to what we're working on in the coming days. Joanna, what's keeping you busy?
Vietnam recently has accelerated its public investment program, marked by the simultaneous rollout of many large-scale infrastructure projects. From July 1st, owners of certain types of construction projects, including those of large scale and those posing great impact on the safety and interest of the general public, are mandated to purchase construction insurance. Besides, minimum insurance coverage for a construction project must not be less than the total value of the contract. So I will follow up this with my sources in Vietnam to see their reaction. Do they see any challenges besides opportunities, of course?
Certainly look forward to that story. On my end, I'm set for an interview with the CEO of BP Marsh, which is a London-based listed private equity fund that specializes in investing into insurance brokers and intermediaries and MGAs, which promises to be a very exciting conversation. BP Marsh has made some investments in Asia recently, and interesting to see what their plan for Asia Pacific is and what their strategy is in the region. Great, it's been a fantastic conversation, everyone. Thank you very much. Let's get back to work.
Thanks, Mithun. Thanks, everyone.
Our special guest for this episode needs no introduction. He's the Chief Executive for Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia and India for Munich Re, Hitesh Kotak. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we discuss some of the hottest topics impacting the broader insurance and reinsurance markets, and specifically for Asia Pacific. This is one not to miss. Hello, Hitesh. Thank you very much for joining us. It's quite a privilege to have you join us for Between the Lines. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mithun. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to talk to you, meet you, and discuss various industry topics. So it's my pleasure.
Thank you. To start off, as we speak, we've just a couple of days after the 1/7 renewals have just been wrapped up. Just trying to understand, it's been a fairly uneventful year in terms of reinsurance renewals, but, we've seen a gradual softening in the market, plenty of capacity. How do you see the reinsurance market where it is now? Brokers and reinsurers and insurers are looking into 2027. How do you see the market as things stand, having completed all the major renewals for 2026?
No, Mithun, yes, we are kind of ending the year as far as renewals are concerned. Of course, the usual facultative business still keeps coming on through the year. So the year is still not over. But as far as renewals are concerned, clearly we are always in a cyclical business. As you know, insurance is heavily cyclical business. And we are at the cycle where it is clearly, buyer's market. So there are some times when it is the seller's market. This time, clearly, it is not in the favor of reinsurers. So, and the result and the reasons are very simple. There is a significant amount of capital in the reinsurance market. There have been benign losses in the past, few years. We've not hit, a large number. And this excess capacity and good results obviously create that expectation towards pricing. So yes, we have seen the market, softening. But what has been a outcome which is quite remarkable is that the panels of reinsurers have not largely undergone change. I think the insurance companies and the reinsurance companies have always found some solution around it. And I think to that extent, this business being a business of relationships, this business being a business of long term, I think that it goes through the normal cycle scenario. So yes, the margins are under pressure, but I think overall the business relationships still remain quite intact, especially for reinsurers like us. Going forward, obviously, we are in the middle of a lot of topics. We are in the middle of geopolitical challenges. We are in the middle of this whole AI, revolution that we are seeing in our market. We are also in the middle of, specifically in our region, the advent of El Nino. So, yeah, there are quite a few topics to tackle. And I think how to predict next year will only be possible once we have good handle of these particular topics on how we navigate. And then I think we'll be in a much better position to put our view as far as 27 is concerned. So a bit early, but definitely interesting time ahead.
Yeah, indeed. We're really halfway through the year, and the second half is more significant for us in the region, especially, we as we go into the typhoon season in most of North Asia, with cyclones in South Asia, etc. How do you describe the current sort of risk environment for Asian carriers as we move into the second half, which is more volatile typically from a weather perils perspective?
Yeah, I mean, if you see our context, Mithun, Asian context, I think for many, many years we've kept on saying that we are underpenetrated. Our economic to insured losses are not in the right, direction. And I would even be bit, if I may sound a little negative, I would also be a bit frustrated, that we become quite complacent as far as our, state of underestimation of risk is concerned. Today, the level of economic activities in Asia has risen manifold in the last decade, but we have not been able to keep the pace as far as penetration is concerned compared to developed markets. Have the risks come down in our continent? Definitely not. And now, in fact, the risks are not only NatCat, but also cyber. And on top of it, if you take the low insurance penetration, it is definitely, I would say, we are not well prepared. You take last year's data, we had almost $73 billion dollars of losses in our continent, and only 12% were covered. So this is clearly a gap which we all need to work together. And when I say together, means not only just insurers, reinsurers, but also a lot of other industrial agencies, a lot of government agencies, to ensure that we are also reaching not just in economic activity to the level of developed markets, but also as far as the insurance levels are concerned. And as I briefly mentioned to you in your previous question, the risks are really rising. And this year particularly, we've all been talking about El Nino. I think that is something that we need to really brace ourselves. Also, we need to be cognizant, that there are also secondary perils, what we call, in our world. They're also rising. We had quite devastating fires in Korea last year. We had quite a few prolonged rainfall events in Thailand. Philippines obviously always exposed to typhoons, so is Japan, earthquake. So those are of course known events, but now the non-peak events are also creating, some kind of, economic losses. And we are still, I would say, a bit far away in terms of providing the right solutions and providing the right kind of preparation as an industry to cover these risks and to provide solutions to our customers.
Indeed. I mean, last year, of course, towards the end, we saw that massive flooding event in Thailand and Southeast Asia, including in Sri Lanka with Cyclone Ditwa. Munich Re has actually predicted a super El Nino. Some of the media is talking about a Godzilla El Nino. That seems to be at the top of the mind for everyone. How do you see that, a super El Nino sort of an event reshaping catastrophe risk across Asia and for the rest of the year?
Clearly, we are not prepared. If the prediction is right on El Nino, we are not prepared for the impact that it will leave behind as far as, again, the penetration gap is concerned. But yeah, a lot of our meteorologists but a lot of even climate experts across the world have predicted, unfortunately, this time the El Nino to be slightly severe. So we kind of expect at least 25% more activity on the storm side. Typically, our region experiences anywhere between 18 to 25 typhoons and storms. Sometimes double-digit severe typhoons. So if there is 25% more activity in that sense, it can create a little bit of difficult situation. And our analysis shows that in such kind of an El Nino effect, the storms typically shift northeastward, which basically means raising landfall probability or raising landfall events in Japan, Korea, or maybe Eastern China. It also means sometimes, because El Nino can create a very digress and diversified impact. So in places like India, it could also mean weaker monsoon, and since India is a very large, crop market, it could also meet a lot of stress on the crop business. If you take Indonesia, Vietnam, it could be drier and warmer conditions can even elevate, drought and wildfire risk. So yeah, so the risks can be pretty different in different parts of our continent. But yeah, I mean, as much as we hope, that the predictions are not going to be right, but if they are partly right, then of course, there will be some damage, some losses, economically in these parts of the world, because we are heavily dependent on, natural, topics and natural environmental conditions.
So, I mean, it's twofold, the sort of impact. One, in Northern Asia, it might be that we'll see more typhoons or more landfalls and more severe typhoons, whereas Southeast Asia and South Asia, it is potentially droughts and drier conditions. That's two very different sort of risk profiles there. Do you think the industry is in the region can service both of these ends, the spectrums of risks? I mean, drought obviously is not peril in that sense that is easily insurable. How do you see the market positioned to deal with some of these risks?
So again, Mithun, it's different in different parts of our continent. Since you mentioned drought, of course, drought is covered in a way through agriculture insurance. Because if there is a lack of yield, then some of the markets do provide insurance cover for the farmers. India has a product. Thailand used to have that product, but it's undergoing some changes. Korea has some similar solutions. So yeah, drought in a way can manifest into agriculture insurance. Excess rainfall, I think, see, if you take some industrialized belts or industrialized countries like Japan, Korea, even some of the industrial belts across mainland China, but also India, I think the penetration level of core industries is well covered. So I think the industry will be prepared, to handle such events and losses arising out of it. I think the question is clearly if it starts to hit the underpenetrated areas, then there could be a significant amount of disruption caused in the economic activity. And in this year where you already have had a significant strain coming out of the West Asia crisis and the fuel prices going up, I think any such economic disruption can just unnecessarily keep smaller economies or other emerging economies a bit behind the curve as far as development is concerned. So yeah, we have to be watchful, and we have to ensure that these losses and the preparation is very much in line.
I want to come back. You did mention the geopolitical disruptions in supply chain and other concerns. But before I just come to that, I want to ask you about the opportunity for innovation for insurers and reinsurers. There's been talk about parametric solutions, public-private partnerships, new modeling tools. Where do you see the greatest opportunity, and where is the greatest need for investment or innovation from insurers and reinsurers at the moment?
I think you mentioned that. Yeah, you mentioned that, Mithun. I think parametric solutions is clearly a topic which it's not new. It's not something that has just emerged. I think a lot of effort has been put around putting across these structured solutions, parametric solutions around for the last decade or so. It's now that it is getting traction because I think both insurers, reinsurers, and the buyers could be government, could be financial institutions, could be transnational institutions. I think now they have been able to come on the table and express their concerns, which were not very clear in the past. And I think once stakeholders come on the table, you always find solutions. And I think now the industry is able to structure some of these solutions which are able to address what the needs are of the government institutions or financial institutions, as I said. And we are seeing some success towards that. And I think largely these are catered to the underpenetrated segments. These are largely catered to the segment for which insurance is not very affordable, because it is heavily driven by either subsidies or heavily driven by sponsoring institutions. But I think it's a good start. And I think once the end consumers or the end beneficiaries see the benefit, I think we will be able to see the transition from they being subsidized or funded to being self-funded. And I think that will be an interesting transition as far as parametric solutions are concerned. And then moving on beyond parametric solutions, I think, here, I think we are, the moment we find new risks, the moment we find new vulnerabilities, I think the industry is able to proactively work around solutions. Cyber is a great example. It is really becoming a product by itself. We will very soon see a lot of demand coming from, AI and related topics. So I think industry is already thinking about those solutions. But also we have to remember, Mithun, that insurance is still a push product. It's not a product which has the inherent, nature where you will suddenly find demand getting generated on its own. Insurance for centuries has been a category where you have to educate, create awareness, provide the right distribution. So it's not so much about always coming up with new products and new solutions. It's always a lot about finding affordable, simple solutions which can be easily distributed. And I think end of the day, the onus is really on us to provide value, to the consumer. And we have to ensure that we don't repeat some of the mistakes that we did in the past. In the past, there could be topics where the acquisition cost was too high and the customer would not see the value, or the product was too complex to understand, and I think these are some of the topics that we need to first cover. So I would emphasize a lot on simplicity, affordability, easy to distribute, easy to reach out, and rather than always thinking about what could be the new product or what could be the new ways to design or reach out. I think even if we provide solutions around the conventional traditional products, there's a lot to do.
You briefly touched upon, emerging risks. I mean, this cyber, AI, and more importantly, right now as we speak, obviously the geopolitical risks that we've seen due to the conflict in the Middle East. How do you sort of see these emerging risks impacting business as we stand? I mean, beyond climate risk and beyond weather, climate perils, how are these new sort of emerging challenges affecting the industry as we stand?
No, glad, Mithun, you brought this topic because I think the common theme in the last few years has been interconnectedness. Risks that were in the past, we felt they were isolated or they were specific. And you mentioned climate risks. They were fairly isolated. And, if something happened in one area, it could not affect the other areas directly. Indirectly, it could, but directly there was no impact. But now, as we are entering, into this era, everything is so interconnected. You take geopolitical risk that you mentioned. Today, the immediate impact of that is on supply chain risk. Today the fuel supply is such heavily disrupted. It creates so much pressure on the supply chain. The costs go up of all the industries that are dependent on fuel. Take fertilizers. Fertilizer cost goes up. It affects food security of various industries. Diesel cost goes up. It affects transportation. Sometimes even infrastructure investment is affected because, contractors are not sure whether they will get the raw material on time. And nobody wants to start a project without assurance of, raw material as a resource. So everything has become so interconnected as far as geopolitics is concerned, even though war as such is not a covered topic, but the impact of that, the impact of war has huge, correlation. Take again digital concentration. I mean, today we have become so much dependent, on cloud, on technology providers, and we saw a few outages here and there in a very small, relatively small supplier of some of these services can create a huge cascading effect. We saw airlines getting stalled, credit card, not being working. So all these are very vulnerable risks which can have a deep impact because we are so interconnected across the geographies. Similar we will situation we will have as AI gets scaled up. While the productivity improvement is a given, but again the cyber threat activity will also accelerate, because again suddenly you will have so many themes and topics which are connected. So the operational risks, the liability risks, the reputational risks, I think we all have to figure them out and then see how to kind of price them and more importantly offer them in a scalable and simplified manner.
I mean, you mentioned AI. I mean, the last few years we've been talking about cyber, and we've really seen cyber come through as, like you said, a standalone product and a big growth in that sort of line of business. But AI is potentially even bigger, and there's probably lots of conversations. And in many, you mentioned, cyber threat could be accelerated due to AI, but there's also risks. Professional lines. I was reading some reports on 1/7 renewals. There were conversations around what AI means for professional lines and the risk that it adds there. There's also questions about within the insurance industry about underwriting risks, where you're implementing AI and for claims and underwriting and other core functions. Where do you sit on the whole AI spectrum? Do you think there are concerns for the industry, for the broader industry, or do you think the industry is on top of how the risks are evolving around AI?
See, Mithun, industry will take time, obviously, to come on top of such risks. Not because industry is not well prepared. It's just that the risk is so fast. It's so evolving. I mean, what we discuss on AI today is not applicable 2 weeks or 2 months down the line, right? So I think the risk is so dynamic. That it is very important to understand what impact it can create and what vulnerabilities it can create. So I mean, at this stage, I would say AI largely has been lot of discussions around AI. But if you see use cases of AI, they are around productivity enhancement. They are around improvement of what you are doing. Are they really transformationally changing the way the industry works? I think it's still work in process. And also at the same time, a lot of industries are also evaluating of how much to invest and how to invest into AI, because we have to also realize that these are huge costs and these are huge investments that companies and industries have to make, and how much return can it generate. It will generate return, there's no doubt about it. And Mithun, on your specific topic on the industry readiness on AI, there have been some attempts made and some solutions being made. We at Munich Re and along with our associate company HSB, have been able to devise a product called AI Sure, which provides the protection against a failure of AI or failure of algorithm. Still early days, but we can really see a good amount of demand and good amount of inquiries being generated. And I think this is an area which will scale up in the future. But I think the quantification process and the evaluation process is still ongoing beyond efficiency and productivity enhancement. So I think clearly we have to identify industry verticals. We have to understand which industry gets impacted by what level, and then obviously start putting solutions across it, because the scalability impact of AI is definitely massive, and hence it's important to go by industry and study it. But obviously I think liability risks, reputation risks, the AI not achieving what it wants to achieve, I mean, these are some of the risks that we have to look at. On the other side of the coin, there is also a lot of malicious things can happen. We've heard about a lot of articles around how hacking can be done at a much scale level. So yeah, we have to be quite prepared to address these topics. And since it's dynamic, I cannot say that everybody's on top of it, but everybody's kind of preparing and bracing themselves. And then you look at the infrastructure for AI. And I think that, from an reinsurance perspective, that's a much more critical topic, now, because all this AI, all these applications of AI, all these usages of AI will need tremendous amount of hard infrastructure. And then I talk about data centers. And once you talk about data centers, it's not just about building a data center, but the amount of power that is required, the amount of clean water that is required. So I think it has a lot of impact on the cloud services, the physical resources that are required to run a successful and a large data center where the demand will be very high. And then moment you have huge data centers, then you have to think about how do you manage the accumulated risks? How do you manage the interruption risks? Because suddenly everybody's dependent on that data center infrastructure. And what if the power utility is disrupted? What if there is heavy rain and there is no access to these data centers? While we all know and believe that these data centers are going to be very efficient and less manpower intensive, but the resources that are required beyond manpower are going to be quite massive. And I think that is again a big topic, which is insurance industry is trying to find solutions to assess it and to then take over the risks that we can take over and we can price.
Again, comes back to the interconnectedness that you were talking about, right? It's not just AI, then it's back to climate risks again, because and resources and power, and that seems that'll continue to be a big theme in Asia. I mean, I just want to just going back to AI specifically. I mean, I think one of the ways the insurance industry deals with emerging risk is often excluding it from risk in in exclusionary wordings and stuff like that. Are you seeing that sort of steps being taken by reinsurers and insurers at this moment, or industry still trying to figure out what to exclude and what not to? I mean, where do you see the industry is in that scale of sort of evolution of understanding AI?
See, it's early days, and like the industry, got together and provided solutions for cyber. It was not easy, because you had to understand because the complexity of the risk. You had to understand, how the failures will work, and based on that, you start to price. And obviously, there's not enough data, there's not enough experience. You don't even know how much systemic risks it carries, because we mentioned interconnected, so there's so much systemic risk around. It's not about single failure; it's about the whole cascading effect that you will have to study. So I think everybody is right now in the process of understanding, assessing the risks, which are usually the initial steps before you come up with product structures and product design. But it's moving at a good pace. I would say there's a nice collaboration between insurers, reinsurers, broking community to figure out how do we bring all these data pieces together, and then we can probably find the right way to price. And once we have the right ways to price, obviously, then, the risks are, transferable, and there is a market for such risks. So I'm pretty confident the way we found solutions for cyber, which have been sustained, over decades now, and today it has become a very large product category. I think we will be able to find solutions for this segment as well.
Going back to, I mean, last time we met, Hitesh, and we had a conversation, you mentioned about solving the protection gap in Asia requires better distribution models and approaches from insurers and reinsurers. You briefly mentioned that in an earlier question as well. I was wondering if, how we talk about protection gap and the risks, there are newer risks, emerging risks. We haven't solved for existing risks, but there are emerging risks coming through as well. And, with El Nino and all of that, there's compounding of risks as well. How do you think primary insurers and distribution models can change or adapt or to better distribute the products, better reach the masses in our part of the world?
No, again, Mithun, great question, and this is a challenge for entire of our industry. And I'll go back to my previous comment that I made. That I think one, of course, we need to have simple, affordable products and products that the consumers can associate value to. And here I would also again shift my little attention on affordability, because many times we put so much emphasis on acquisition cost, and sometimes the acquisition cost itself is much higher than the risk cost. And I think the days are gone where customers would not see through that and buy your products, such products. So I think clearly we as an industry have to get out of this reputation that we have sometimes in the individual lines of mis-selling or pushing the products. I think we have to make the products more affordable, more simple. We need to attract a lot of first-time buyers, especially in Asia, because we all know our penetration levels in count, if I say, would be anywhere between 1 to 5%, depending on which country you're talking to. So you have a clearly large chunk of buyers who are still not being reached to. So we need to find ways to attract them. So I would say a lot of work around micro insurance, on demand, cover, think innovative around how can we make the products, embed or integrate with their other lifestyle purchases or other banking purchases or financial purchases, but without really disrupting the value chain. The value has to be created for the customer. The value has to be created for the distribution. I'm not saying the distribution should not create value, but everything has to be in proportional. And I think once that is reached, once we are able to achieve that, I'm sure we'll be able to manage this penetration challenge that we have been facing for quite some time. It's not an easy one, of course, because as I said, insurance is still a push product, and I think we will have to always keep that in mind and double down our efforts on simplifying the products, but also making the whole distribution process easier for the customers.
Getting the first-time buyers in is probably the biggest challenge, right? That's all the questions I have for you today, Hitesh. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of Between the Lines. Thank you for joining us once again. Don't forget to subscribe to our daily and weekly newsletters to keep you informed. Find us at InsuranceAsiaNews.com. My name is Mithun Varkey. Thanks for listening.